All right, I guess I'll get started since the doors are now closed. Thank you everyone for choosing to end your first day of GCAP in this room listening to what I have to say. I hope you've all had an excellent first day of the conference so far. So just to quickly introduce myself, my name is Trewartha. I've been teaching in games for quite some time now and working in games for a little bit longer than that. Alright, so today's, I was about to say today's lesson. So that's going to be a really hard habit to not stick with all talk. So, yes, I will be spending this afternoon discussing with you what we think we mean by the phrase getting into games exactly. I'd be willing to bet that pretty much everyone in this room got into games for some reason that was special to you. There's something about video games that have resonated with you in some way, and I'm pretty sure that for at least the vast majority of you, that the reason that you got into games in the first place isn't just purely for the pursuit of money. If lined pockets is all you're looking for in a career, then video games is at best a strange choice of career, and at worst a cynical one. So there's more likely to be something, about the actual experience of play itself that got you into games. Play is, after all, a fundamental human experience, just like food or water or human contact. We need it as part of our lives, not just us, game developers, humans. And so us, game developers, we have chosen to spend our lives adding to that, possibility space that people can use to engage with when they need to fill that need. We create the things that people use to play to get that, part of life that they need. So we here in this room, and I am going to, as we go through this, try and sort of split this a little bit down the middle between, longer term developers and people who are maybe still students or maybe recent graduates or whatever, because there's sort of a slightly different importance of takeaway between those two things there. But the talk primarily is kind of skewed a bit more towards those who've been around for a while and maybe have the ability to use their positions within the industry and the resources that they've accumulated over their career to assist others, to light the way, if you will. Hopefully not as blindingly as, you want to help the person, not cause them retinal damage. All right, so why? Why go to all this effort? You could just say, each to their own, I guess. You want to get into the industry, get into the industry. But by helping others get into the industry, for whatever, that word means, if we branch out and, make an effort to bring others into our world that, would otherwise not necessarily be able to find their way in as easily or whatever, then that collective end result that we produce as an industry, that well of experience for people to enjoy as part of their lives when they need to engage with play, we will be broadening and deepening that well by bringing more experiences into it from the outside. So I would like you all to just have a think for a second, and I'm going to stop them there, otherwise they will get too large. They become enormous as they walk off into the distance. So I just want you to cast your mind back to when you were, quote unquote, getting into the industry, right? What kind of, challenges did you face? What kind of obstacles were in your way? What circuitous route did you have to take? Was it a lifelong pursuit, or was it an accidental recent occurrence, or anything in between? How opaque did the industry seem to you when you were on the other side of it? Who helped you along the way? Did anyone? And in what ways did they help you? In what ways do you wish you had help from other people? And if you have been in the industry for a while, how have you sort of been paying that forward? Who have you helped since? Who helped you get into the industry? So from the outside, even to people who, it is their career goal to get into the games industry, it can seem a little bit, as impenetrable as, or, as fanciful as potentially, working in the circus sounds to most people. The circus is kind of the cliche as a child, like, it's just not a career kind of thing. It is the imaginary thing. But I actually used to live with some circus performers, and it turns out there's quite a lot in common with the way that, ignore that one, I pressed the wrong button. There's quite a lot in common between the sort of worlds of circus performing and game development. And unfortunately, one of those things that is in common is that it is just, it seems a little bit magical and mysterious and, so other when it comes to a pursuit in your life. So there are a couple of other things I'd like you to sort of bring to mind as I'm talking. And the first one is, at what point in your career did that all become sort of demystified? Working in games is an amazing job. I hope you all agree. It's a job where we get to, bring incredible acts of creativity into the world. Things that will change people's lives potentially. But at the end of the day, it is still a job. It has all of the kind of, deadlines and responsibilities and duties that any regular job has. At some point, you would have had that realization in your own career, in your own path to this point. I keep getting ahead of myself. I think we do ourselves a bit of a disservice in the games industry by giving it that kind of like mystical aura where, it's great. We want to, make the world know how amazing, video games can be and what you can achieve if you work in this field. But I think we do ourselves a bit of a disservice by, whether deliberately or accidentally, cultivating this kind of, image around it that is kind of akin to, Neverland or, Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory or whatever, where, people imagine that maybe on the other side of the pearly gates we get nothing but puppy massages all day. There we go. There are some bugs in this presentation. It hasn't been properly QA'd. Actually, spoilers for the end, there's some really brutal bugs because just as I was getting ready to come up here, I went to make a quick build of it. You may notice the Unity interface there. And when I made a build, it wrecked everything. So a few of the animations are a little bit broken. So keep an eye out for things that look strange. So yeah, we do ourselves a bit of a disservice having this kind of image to people who are maybe trying to get into the games industry. Like it's, having not necessarily a not realistic idea of what it is to work in the industry, but like having that so like othered imagination of what the industry is, rather than just seeing it as a regular part of the regular world that operates pretty much the same as the rest of the world. Okay, so that's getting into games, by the way. So, I kind of glossed over the whole who is me thing at the beginning there. Why am I standing here in front of you in the first place? In case you're wondering, here's a couple of things that I've worked on that you might care about. But, I mean, honestly, and part of what I continuously try to get across to my students, as well as anyone who happens to find themselves in conversation with me, is that it's one thing to ship a game, right? And that is, an extremely hard thing to do, and an incredibly, important and valuable thing to achieve, if, that is your goal. But apart from these couple of highlights here, throughout my career, which started in 2006, and when I say career, I mean the whole kind of spotty wording that we're kind of dancing around here, working in games. I mean the bit at which I started getting paid for doing the work that I do, right? So I've been quote-unquote working in games since 2006, and in that time I've only worked on 4 games that have shipped, but I've worked on close to 50 games, demos, pitches, whatever, that, haven't. And I would argue that avenue of experience is one of the most underrated. Like everyone says, oh, you got to learn from your failures and all that kind of stuff. But it just goes so glossed over so frequently. I'm skipping ahead to a future slide, so I'll put a pin in that one for a second. Let's not get too carried away. The point that I'm making here is that so I started this whole thing 13 years ago, and around about 2009, just as I was coming to the end of my contract on at 2K on BioShock, I found myself looking for work again, as so many of us frequently do. Working in this industry tends to be a bit of hopping from job to job, and as I was looking for work on that particular occasion, one of my teachers from AIE back in Canberra, where I also studied 1,000 years ago, they got in touch with me because they knew I was looking for work, and asked if I wanted to, start teaching the teaching courses. And that's me playing games as a little kid. So yes, my teacher got in touch with me, and I'm like, yes, I guess I can teach evening courses. I did not think I was cut out for being a teacher, that's for sure. All I wanted to do, for my entire life to that point was, be done with school, graduate, and just make nice games for the rest of my life. Just, spend my life making games. But, it was work, so I took it. And I hated it. I mean, that didn't literally happen, but that, visual metaphor. So, yeah, my first year of teaching, I hated it big time. And I certainly didn't think I was cut out for it. But, work was work, and I stuck with it. And, teaching gigs kept coming up over the years, and I've worked at a whole bunch of different schools now. And as, it kept going on, I found that it was actually probably the area that I'd worked in that ended up being the most fulfilling. Because what I didn't realize at the time, when I just sort of took the casual evening work because I needed the work, was that you then in turn get to, pass on to the next generation and help them do what they're trying to do with their lives. And not just you sit in your own little bubble and go, okay, I'm going to do my thing, and then to hell with everyone else. So, after all these years of teaching, I haven't been teaching my entire career, but I have now been teaching contiguously for about 6 years. Not all at the same place, at a few different schools. And one thing I've really noticed over that time is that it's starting to feel, from my end anyway, a lot like Groundhog Day. So I don't just mean because I'm teaching the same class every year and so I can pretty much do it in my sleep by now. I mean that the conversations that I have with students is starting to feel, a little bit depressingly repetitive. At the beginning of the year, every year, I ask my students what they're hoping to get out of their education. I, ask them what they want to get out of their career. Why are they studying games in the first place? And most of them, a surprisingly large number in fact, will somewhere in that answer include some version of, I want to make my own games. Often they'll say something like, I want to start my own studio as well. But more frequently, it's some version of, I want to make my own games. And that's great. That's, that's the kind of, spark and drive that we all need to sort of kickstart us off and get us going. But then, as time sort of goes on, and they kind of, get to the end of their education, and this is regardless of institution, right? This is something I've noticed to be pretty universal. That ambition of, I want to get out there and change the world, slowly evolves into, God, I hope I get a job. I just want to get a job. I heard that there was like this one job going, but everyone is applying for it. And I know this other person is like better than I am, so I probably won't get it. Because we've all heard the stats, right? Like, it's something like 1 trillion students graduate from games courses every year, all competing for like 3 jobs. I think those are the exact numbers, I don't know, you can look them up yourself. But the thing is, that's, at some point, that drive and that motivation and that goal to pursue something that, you were inspired by and that you want to inspire others with, the spark sort of disappears and you just sort of fall into this singular view of what success really means, which is to just get slotted into a little job on the shelf somewhere. This is the games industry that stands before students as they graduate. This impenetrable monolith where they have to find the one tiny little crack to get their foot in and get the one job that the trillion of them are competing for. But, I mean, cast your mind back to, the question that I addressed at the very beginning. How was it that you got into the games industry in the first place? I mean, I'm not sure exactly what the demographic in the room is at the moment, but around the conference in general, I would be willing to bet that, there's a significant portion of people working in games who there wasn't even games courses that existed when you were quote unquote getting into games. Like, it all had to start somewhere, right? And, you know, we pioneer these ideas that our industry is so flexible and can be anything, and that, you know, people should, you know, pursue whatever it is that they want to pursue. But there isn't, I mean, there is some mechanisms to then follow through on that, of course, and I'll be talking a bit about that at the end. But in general, that thread just sort of gets left hanging. It's like, all right, off you go, do whatever you want. Good luck. So what are we up to here? Yeah, that's what we're up to. All right, so I found myself this year only teaching part-time. And so that meant I had a whole bunch of extra time on my hands to do something with. And my first thought was, okay, cool, I'll now go and make one of the games that I've, you know, been meaning to make for a very long time. And I thought back to when I was, a few years ago, hot desking at the arcade when it was over on City Road at the old location. And, you know, sort of making some ad hoc future plans for myself to just go and start hot desking again in the new location. I hadn't seen it from the inside yet. But I couldn't help but thinking back to all the conversations that I'd had over the years with students who, you know, basically fell into the pattern that I was just describing then. You know, they get to the end of their qualification and they have all of the potential in the world, but then no direction to do anything with it. And so I thought, all right, why don't I, you know, have a talk to some people who are going to be graduating very soon and see what their plans are next year. You know, talk to them about my plan for going and hot desking at the arcade and you know, see what they think. And then I started talking to a colleague of mine at the time, the force of nature, Kerry Davies, who, you know, she's also in the past dabbled in starting her own indie studio, which is something that I've dipped my toe in the past 13 years as well. And we were sort of chatting about it, about the whole, you know, what do students do when they drop out the other end of their qualification? And we're like, well, okay, why don't we help them? Why don't we, instead of just watching them once again, you know, fly out there and just sort of like dissipate, instead of just talking about it, this time we'll do it. Oh, skipped over that bit. So, one of the things that, you know, we kind of realized is that people will be able to do great things if they're just given the opportunity and the chance and the situation to actually do it. And I think that's what it comes down to a lot of the time, is that at both ends of the equation, no one knows how to make that opportunity exist. People who come out of, you know, games courses don't know what to do with themselves, and, you know, studios or other people that would fall under the broad umbrella of the games industry sort of see the zombie hordes of students coming at them and go, oh, I don't know what to do with that. And so Kerry and I had a chat to a few of the people who we had been trying to encourage to do something along these lines with their futures after they graduated. And we sort of put this proposition to them, look, why don't we do it with you? And so we started a new game studio called Manatee, or Manatee if you say it properly, because then it's a joke. And that seemed to be all it needed. Like, after seeing year after year of students, you know, fairly positively taking our advice and agreeing with us and trying to do what we suggested and all that kind of thing. But then just kind of drifting out there into the world after year of that. All it seemed to take was us going, all right, look, we'll do it with you. And then it just kind of took off. It's what I've been spending my entire year doing, along with the rest of the team. And yeah, it pretty much just took like a little bit of encouragement and someone who had sort of been down that path before to say, all right, come on, let's go. We can sort of point you in the right direction. Now, one of the things that we kind of, we're a fairly large team, right? There was the sort of initial group of people that we saw who were about to graduate, and we sort of put it to them and went, hey, let's do this. And then over the course of the year, we've grown to a team of 14 people, which sounds a lot, right? Like, we constantly get told things like, or asked questions in a rhetorical way, why not start small? You're never going to be able to support 14 people. How are you going to be able to, like, ship enough units to be profitable and stay in business in the future and whatever? The thing is, we've been down the path of like the small indie team before. Myself on at least 4 or 5 occasions that I can think of. 1, 2 or 3 people. And it is, it's possible to make a game in that time with a couple of people in your spare time, in your evenings or whatever, or even if it's a similar situation to what I described earlier, where, I do part-time at my other job and then part-time at the studio. Even then, it's still going to take you forever to make a video game with a few people. And I know people who have done it, and absolutely, like, a million props to them. Like, I'm not saying that that is not something you should pursue if that's the path you want to go down. But we set ourselves a goal of going, all right, let's chip in a bit for rent at the arcade. We'll do it for 12 months, and we'll see how we go. I've already talked about that slide. So we pretty much set ourselves the goal of 12 months and 1 game. That's what we set out to do. We will ship a game by the end of the year, and then whatever happens, happens. And the considerations of, oh, we're too big a studio, there's too many people, too many mouths to feed, you won't be able to stay alive, that almost kind of didn't matter in a way. Of course it's a consideration. We are making a commercial product and we want to make money with it and we want to keep doing this for as long as we can. But we set ourselves up in a way that everyone on the team is only doing this part-time and everyone has something else going on in their lives. Most of us have other part-time jobs that we support ourselves with. Some of us have enrolled in other courses of study. It's different from person to person. But we all went in with the goal of, we're going to make a game, we're going to put it out, and it will be actual real-life industry experience that you can't get from study, you can't get from reading books, you can't get from just concentrating really hard. Like, there are certain things that you can only learn on the job, right? And I've gone way off book here. I keep saying things in different orders to the slide. So, Kerry and I, showing our support to this group of people, it turned out to be the magic fairy dust, the silver bullet, the magic brew, That's not a saying, but it was just a good reason to stay on brand. So yeah, funnily enough, it turns out when you've got a group of people who do have all that potential and no direction, if you just give them a little bit of direction, that's literally all it needs, and then stuff will happen. And it is incredible seeing what the team has made this year. It's just unbelievable, and I'm not just saying that to like talk myself up or whatever. I've had very little to do with it, to be honest. Because we have a team of 14 people and we're only working part-time, it means that we do have all of the skills in the room to, actually produce what we have set out to produce in a reasonable time frame. We treated the whole endeavour as an investment in ourselves. So rather than sort of, making sure that we squirreled enough away to sort of like sustain ourselves and stay alive for however long it took to make a game, 4, 5, 6 years or whatever, we went, no, we're going to just, pay for the office space, make a game, see what happens. Not just an investment in ourselves, but an investment in each other as well. So the team has grown to 14 people over the year. It started out a little bit smaller than that. And over the year, seeing the way that they have sort of grown and what they have got out of this experience, it's kind of what made me want to pitch this talk here today. You've probably picked up on the fact that I'm not super experienced or versed in this whole kind of like, formal presentation thing. It's very different to teaching. It's, it looks pretty similar. There's a bunch of you over here and there's one of me here. Very different experience though. But over the year, seeing how they've sort of developed from, new grads who were about to, go out into the world and didn't know what to do with themselves, into a well-oiled functioning team, it's absolutely 100% proven to me that, like, we should be doing more of this. We should be finding ways to just get people to build their own futures once they graduate and not have to, deathmatch over the 1 or 2 tiny little opportunities that happen to be kicking around. Now, I realise that this year the numbers are a little bit different. There's actually quite a few jobs going around at the moment, which is fantastic. I'm speaking long-term trends here. And the real benefit that they get out of this is that, even at the end of the year, if we, shut our doors, we stop paying rent at the arcade for the 12 months that we set aside, and we go, all right, cool, that was awesome, see you all later. At the end of the year, they're still going to have a game, a commercially shipped product that they can point to and say, I made this. They can put it on their resume and then do something else with their futures. In fact, 2 of our team have already gone on to find other full-time work, and I'm dead proud of them for that. This has already been a springboard for them to go on to other things. And it should be noted that that is not any kind of form of failure. It's not any kind of slight against the goal of starting one's own studio. Everything in our industry is ephemeral. I would be willing to bet that if we did a quick count around the room, the average number of jobs that each of us have had in their career, or the average that each of us have had, the average across the room is going to be significantly higher than how many of us that there are. We have to chop and change and go where the work is and learn how to sort of navigate that by being in the real world and part of it ourselves, that is another one of those things that you cannot learn at school, right? You can be told about it, but you just can't know how you're going to deal with it until you have to start dealing with it. And so by just fabricating out of thin air this situation where people have to then force themselves to do that, they are then better equipped to go and do it in other situations as well. So what we really did, as great as it is to have started our own studio, and we will be shipping our first game in December this year as planned, what they really did was they just built their own bridge into the games industry without having to, you know, go through the usual channels, I guess. The amount of experience that they have each gained, not just in their own respective fields, like, you know, seeing, you know, the coders and the artists and everyone else in the studio doing what they do now compared to the level that they were doing it when they graduated, it's off the charts. They are industry professionals now, whether you like it or not. And, you know, that is something that, you know, when you graduate, we all tell all of our students that you have to, you know, keep your blade sharp. You have to keep practicing and working on your stuff. But it's one thing to just sort of sit there and work on your portfolio and polish up this or that. It's another thing entirely to just throw yourself into the industry and go, you know what, I'm just going to do it myself. So if things go well and we do make enough money, then we'll be coming back in 2020. But whether we do or not, it doesn't really matter. This whole venture has, as far as I'm concerned, been a success. I already talked about that one. We all do other stuff. So I guess the whole point of what I'm getting at here, and why I'm sort of going into detail about how, you know, our studio was set up and the way that we operate and why we're doing it the way that we're doing it, is because it is important to be able to recognize that there are alternative avenues to success. You don't have to follow somebody else's template and definition of what success is. If you set yourself a goal and you achieve it, that's success, right? Success doesn't have to be monetary. Now, this slide, probably should have said it before I gave the reveal away. The more traditional definition of success, it's kind of one of two major camps, right? Like when you graduate, you get the 9-to-5 job in the studio, or if you're going to go indie, which is fairly highly encouraged, you know, by the industry and by teachers and by everyone. But the kind of unsaid, you know, baggage that comes with that is that you damn well better make a hell of a lot of money by going indie so that you can support yourself or whoever you rope in with you or whatever. So it's job or make a crap load of money. So getting into games kind of feels like a very all or nothing situation. And I see students at the end of every year just be terrified by that prospect. Like, it's year after year at GCAP, there's, you know, always this sort of background ambient hum, if not directly talks about this exact topic of imposter syndrome, right? Like, those of us who've been working in the industry for decades still get imposter syndrome. We don't think that, you know, I mean, even putting this talk together here right now today, I've never spoken at GCAP before, and so I'm sitting here thinking, God, am I doing this right? I don't know. I'm holding a 360 controller. That doesn't seem right. Imagine how it feels to people who are just popping out of school for the first time, and they're looking at this, like, enormous more before them that is the games industry. They've got imposter syndrome like you wouldn't believe, and it does become kind of paralyzing. So this is where I ask you to cast your mind back to the question that I asked you at the very, very beginning of the talk, where I sort of proposed the hypothetical where you consider why you got into games in the first place. Maybe it was to, you know, just bring something from your imagination to life. Maybe it's because you wanted to touch somebody else's life. Maybe it's because you just really enjoy seeing the smiles on the faces of people that, you know, are enjoying what you've created. Maybe you want to bring important issues to light, or maybe you just really like solving challenging problems. I'd be willing to bet that almost no one went, you know what? God, I love paying rent. It's my favorite thing in the world. And if I just get a games job, I'll be able to pay rent, and then I can die happy. Paying rent's great. Eating's pretty good too. We need both of those things. But, like, there are other reasons that most of us get into this industry in the first place. And that's what we have really sort of been focusing on with our studio, because that can then keep that kind of spirit alive to get you through this industry that can be a little bit rough and soul-crushing at times. Okay, so I've really got to pick up the pace because I've got 10 minutes left, so this is going to be lightning round. It's funny that we even have to have this conversation in games, right? Like, comparing it to other industries for a second, you know, related fields, creative fields. My brother, for example, plays in a band. He plays gigs, he records his music, he sells it for money, and there is absolutely no question, no one would not call him a guitarist. He plays a guitar. But he also has another job as well, and he does that to pay his rent and to pay his bills and to make a living. But no one looks at him and goes, well, you're not a real guitarist, obviously. Look at you, you're doing the news or something. So why do we do this with video games? And I just used music as an example there. But I would say it'd be pretty easy to name a fair few other, you know, fields where you could go, yeah, of course you do that on the side and then you do other work and life just goes on. But for whatever reason, the conversation around games work, it always includes sentences like, hasn't got a real job yet, or hasn't worked in an actual studio, or, you know, things like that. And maybe you do or don't use those phrases yourself personally, but just have a listen to the way the conversation is phrased next time you hear it happening around you. It can be really, really demoralizing. It is a significant barrier to entry for those who are trying to get into our industry for the first time, being described that way, and they hear themselves talked about as if they're, you know, secondary to the real game devs. So that's why we tried to set up Manatee as a springboard for I hope you're enjoying the very disjointed interstitial visuals. For our team to not just be constantly on that other side of that, you know, impenetrable, mostly psychological outside of the games industry. Oh yeah, and if we go really well, we don't want to just limit it to the current team. We want to just keep making this an avenue for as many people as possible. And I've only got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to have to blast through this, and I really wanted to make sure I was able to do this bit of the talk justice. But it is definitely time to address an elephant in the corner of the room. And that particular elephant is, again, going back to the kind of ambient conversation that you hear about the way that our industry operates and all of that kind of stuff. Our industry, unfortunately, and I am quite sure that this is not just our industry, but we tend to be fairly focused on games. It's the thing that we put a microscope up to, and we are currently standing in the middle of a conference dedicated to. So we, unfortunately, in games, and I'm pretty sure this has been from day one, it certainly hasn't really gone away, but it ebbs and flows, have a bit of a problem with people being exploited. There's no getting around that. And students are always the first go-tos for that. And it's, unfortunately, something that we've been accused of at Manatee because, you know, people who, with very little experience, are working with people who do have some experience. Apparently that's suspicious. But just sort of going back to the, you know, the kind of things that people can run into when they're sort of new and naive and not familiar with our industry. I've fallen victim to it myself, and I'd already been working in the industry for years. When I first moved down to Melbourne, I moved down here because the games industry was here, and I didn't really know the local scene that well. I just knew there was a lot of it. So I got down here and I started applying for jobs and stuff. And I've already gone past that one. And I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail about what happened, but I definitely didn't do enough due diligence in some situations that I got myself into. And oh boy, were they some serious situations. And it really, really brought to my attention just how ruthless some people can be just exploiting other people. And so I think we now also have just this kind of background hum of cynicism and assuming the worst of people, whatever the opposite of giving the benefit of the doubt is. And so that, I think that's where, you know, people have sort of been casting glances at us sideways and going, what's going on over there? Well, what's going on is a bunch of people graduated their qualifications, decided they wanted to start a studio and make their own games, and me and Kerry are helping them do it. I can't remember what that slide was about, but we need to get blasting through this because there's only 3 minutes left. So I'm going to skip over that one as well, no time for it. So what we're really doing is, you know, oh crap, that one, this one is the context for this one. All right. So, again, super quickly, speaking to a friend who works in a totally unrelated field, someone I know who just recently got their PhD in psychology, and we were talking about the differences in our industries, right? And she was telling me how, you know, to get into psych, you have to do a certain number of hours, like under an industry professional, and she went into all the details of how the structure was set up. And it sounded, and like it's mandatory, right? It's not optional. And it sounded very much like the kind of master and apprentice type setup, which I honestly think should be the default in probably every industry, but definitely our industry. And there's some great stuff sort of heading in that direction. In the keynote this morning, the working lunch was mentioned, and we also have some initiatives here in Melbourne as well. There are great mentorships that exist, and one of our team has actually been participating in one of them all year, run by Girl Geek Academy. And what she has got out of that is amazing. It has been one of the most beneficial experiences I can imagine from what she's been telling me. But we need more mechanisms to then follow through on that, right? Like, these mentorship things sound fantastic. But I do worry that maybe sometimes people still then drop out at the end of them in the same way that they drop out of the end of their qualification and not really know what to do with that information once they have had all of that great experience sort of loaded into them. So my time is up, and I'm going to have to really quickly burn through these last few slides. The point of this slide is that game development is not a zero-sum game. There isn't like X amount of game development that exists that we each get a little slice of, and when it's run out, no more people can do it. Anyone who wants to make a game should be able to. And we, as people who work in this industry, should be trying to facilitate those people to do that. There you go. So, just to quickly wrap up, and there is a tiny little bit of a story that goes with this as well. So, anyone in the room who I've taught before is recognizing a pattern here. So, rather than just sort of gasbagging about it and going, oh, there should be this, there should be that, nobody knows what's out there. So, what I'm going to try and do with the rest of my time, whenever that is, I'm going to maintain, no, that's the wrong button, at this URL here, a list of stuff that exists. Now, if you go to this URL right now, that you will run into a tiny little problem because Squarespace can't register .help domains, and I have to stop talking now. Yes? Okay. Crap. There's still 10 minutes. I do have to finish telling the rest of this story. It's only like 1 or 2 minutes. So, this URL is currently sitting in purgatory. Once a time limit for transfer has kicked over, then you'll be able to access this URL. Alright, so if you spot me at all during Games Week, that was Where's Wally, by the way, please, if you have any suggestions or ideas or anything that you know of that can help other people, please tell me. I want to be a sponge for that kind of thing this week. And if you know anybody who knows anything, point them in my direction. This is how you can get in touch with me. Twitter is my preferred way. And if you enjoyed the art in this presentation, please follow Yuki on Twitter. That's what that thing is. I apologize for going over time, but most of you are probably used to it. Thank you very much.